I always thought I was immune to office crushes. I'd been at the company for nearly 2 years, and while there were plenty of people I got along with, none of them ever made my pulse quicken. I was here to grow, to make something of myself, not to get tangled up in some messy HR violation. Then came Tyler. He wasn't the loudest in the room. In fact, he was the kind of guy you had to pay attention to in order to notice. But once you did, you couldn't unsee him. He had this quiet confidence, a calm presence in a sea of overstimulated creatives. He wasn't constantly trying to impress people, which ironically made everyone gravitate toward him. He was smart, but never showy. Funny, but in a blink-and-you'll-miss-it kind of way. He was the guy who remembered the name of your cat, your coffee order, and what song was playing during that pitch last Thursday. The first real conversation we had was about fonts. Yes, fonts. We were sitting next to each other during a branding meeting, and I'd made an offhand comment about hating Helvetica because it reminded me of my old math textbooks. He leaned in and whispered, "That's a hot take. Helvetica is a neutral king." I laughed. And he smiled like he'd been waiting to make me laugh. From that point on, we clicked. Work gave us the perfect excuse: brainstorm sessions, shared presentations, team lunches. I found myself lingering around his desk for no reason, offering to help with projects I normally avoided, and smiling like an idiot when his name popped up on my screen. Our text started after he complimented my Spotify playlist during a team rideshare to a client site. That night, he sent me a message: "Can I confess something? I added half your playlist to mine." I replied, "Should I be flattered or call my lawyer?" It was banter. Natural, effortless banter. The kind that's too rare to ignore. One Wednesday, we worked late finishing a deck for a high-stakes pitch. When we wrapped up around 9:30 p.m., he turned to me and said, "We crushed that. Want to grab something to eat? I owe you noodles." I was exhausted but said yes anyway. We ended up at a quiet little ramen shop, the kind with paper lanterns and low ceilings. The food was great, but the conversation was better. We didn't talk about work, we talked about travel, our childhoods, our biggest fears. I told him about my dream of running a bookstore cafe someday. He told me he once tried to become a stand-up comedian and bombed on his first night. We laughed until we cried. That night, I walked home with my hands in my coat pockets and my heart thudding like it hadn't in years. After that, it was like we had our own little world. At work, we kept it professional, or tried to. But there were glances that lasted too long, meetings where our knees brushed under the table, and mornings where he'd show up with an extra coffee just the way I liked it. No one else knew. It was a beautiful secret. Ours. I wasn't naive. I knew we weren't officially dating. But I thought we were building towards something. I thought he was choosing me, the late-night calls, the sleepy weekend brunches, the way he'd say, "I've never met someone who gets me like you do." I believed him. And that belief, that sweet, hopeful, vulnerable belief, would be the very thing he shattered. Would you like me to continue with part 2 expanded, or would you like a quote from this part to highlight for your audience? The first crack in the illusion came on a rainy Friday night. It had been a long week, back-to-back meetings, last-minute client changes, and an exhausting Thursday pitch that had left the whole team drained. Tyler had texted me that afternoon saying he was stuck late, finalizing some campaign tweaks, and wouldn't be able to meet up for our usual Friday drink. I told him no worries. I even offered to bring him dinner, but he said he'd already ordered something in. At first, I believed him. I always did. But something in the tone of his message felt off. He used a period instead of his usual emoji. The words were short, robotic. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Still, I had this strange weight in my chest that wouldn't go away. So I decided to surprise him. I was already near downtown running errands, and there was this bar we both liked, a quiet spot on the corner of Monroe and State with warm lighting, vinyl booths, and a playlist of 90s R&B that Tyler loved. It's where we had our second unofficial date. It had become our place. As I walked through the door, shaking the rain off my coat, I scanned the room with a smile forming on my lips. I was thinking how happy he'd be to see me, how we'd laugh over how movie-like this moment was. But he didn't laugh. Because he didn't see me. He didn't even know I was there. He was too busy leaning in close to a woman I recognized. She worked in HR. Her hair was pulled up in a soft bun, her laugh was delicate, and she had her hand resting on his forearm like she belonged there. Tyler, the same man who'd texted me just 2 hours ago saying he was slammed with work, had his hand grazing her knee under the table. They weren't having drinks. They were having a moment. My stomach twisted. I took a step back. Then another. I don't know why I didn't confront him. Maybe it was shock. Maybe I didn't want to make a scene. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew what I'd find, and this was just the confirmation I didn't want. I left the bar, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the rain. I walked for blocks, not even sure where I was going. I ended up back at my apartment, still holding the takeout I had picked up for him. The Thai noodles he said reminded him of college. I sat in silence for hours, replaying everything. Every laugh, every late-night message, every glance across the conference table. I scrolled through our texts like I was trying to decode a language I thought I knew. The signs were there, scattered like puzzle pieces I hadn't dared to put together. And the worst part? I still wanted him to explain. Some pathetic part of me hoped there was a reasonable explanation, maybe it was a misunderstanding, a friend, an old flame, anything but the truth I already knew. But hope can be cruel. The next morning, I did what I should have done weeks ago. I started digging. Saturday morning came slowly, like the world was deliberately taking its time to spin. The rain had stopped, but my mind hadn't. I barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Tyler's hand on her knee, her laugh, the way he looked at her like he used to look at me. I couldn't let it go. I needed answers. I needed to know how long I had been living in a lie. So I did what heartbreak does best, I turned into a detective. First, I went through our texts. From the first playful message to the most recent, sorry, working late, I combed through each one like a forensic analyst. I looked at timestamps. Patterns. Gaps. Days when he'd gone unusually quiet. The dots began to connect in painful, undeniable ways. One particular Wednesday stood out. He had cancelled our dinner plans last minute, saying he was feeling sick. I remember being disappointed, but sympathetic. Later that night, I had sent him a funny video. He didn't reply until the next morning. I scrolled through our company's internal Slack and found something I hadn't noticed before, a post in the general channel from Elena in accounting, a selfie from karaoke night. Tyler was in the background. Smiling. Very much not sick. I stared at that photo for a long time. It felt like my chest had cracked open. Elena was sweet. Reserved. Always kind during team meetings. I never would have guessed. I kept digging. I started noticing small interactions in the office. Things I hadn't paid attention to before. Tyler walking into HR more often than necessary. Tyler having coffee at the same time as Elena, every Tuesday. The way he kept his phone face down on the table during meetings. The way he never liked any photos I posted if they had a man standing too close. I wasn't the jealous type. But I wasn't blind anymore. The next time I saw him at work, I watched him closely. He joked with Elena by the printer. Then an hour later, I caught a glimpse of him slipping a note into the HR reps folder, the same woman from the bar. He was good. Too good. I wasn't sure what was worse, that he played all of us, or that he made each of us feel like we were the only one. I didn't confront him right away. I wasn't ready. I needed confirmation from someone else. So I did something bold. I invited Elena for lunch. We sat at a deli 2 blocks from the office. I started light, asking about her role, the stress of closing quarterly reports. Then, as gently as I could, I said, "Hey, can I ask you something a little awkward?" She nodded, confused but open. "Are you seeing Tyler?" Her face changed. Just slightly, a flicker of tension behind her eyes. And then, like she had been holding it in too long, she exhaled. "Yeah. Kind of. I mean, it's not official, but we've been hanging out for a few months." My throat went dry. "Me too," I whispered. We stared at each other. It was like a mirror cracked between us. Silence hung in the air, heavy, intimate, and devastating. She blinked hard, as if trying to process what I just said. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and showed me a photo of her and Tyler at a street fair. 2 weeks ago. Smiling. Arm in arm. I could barely breathe. I showed her a screenshot of my text from that same night, Tyler telling me he was with his mom in Evanston. Elena's hand clenched around her phone. We didn't cry. Not there, in that deli. But something shifted. We both realized we weren't crazy. We weren't clingy or insecure or imagining things. We had been lied to. Deliberately. Skillfully. Repeatedly. And worst of all, we weren't even the only two. Elena looked at me with fire in her eyes and said, "I'm done. I'm reporting him." I nodded slowly, pulse steadying for the first time in days. "You won't be alone." The walk back to the office with Elena felt different. We didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't awkward, it was electric. A silent agreement. We were no longer victims trying to make sense of a lie. We were women taking our power back. The next morning, Elena reported Tyler to HR. She didn't just mention the relationships, she documented everything. How he'd rearranged team assignments to be closer to her, how he used one-on-one meetings as excuses for personal encounters, how he bragged subtly about having options without ever naming names. I followed suit. My report included screenshots of text messages, inconsistencies in his schedules, and the photo of him at the bar with the HR woman, the same person who would not be involved in the case, thanks to obvious conflict of interest. It turned out we weren't the only ones suspicious. Apparently, someone else had already flagged his behavior on the anonymous company ethics hotline, a relatively new initiative launched just 2 months earlier. That report, combined with ours, gave HR all they needed to start a formal investigation. They handled it quietly. One by one, people who had worked closely with Tyler were called into private meetings. Slack histories were reviewed. Calendar patterns analyzed. Suddenly, Tyler wasn't smiling so much in the hallways. His posture changed. A little more rigid, a little more paranoid. He stopped cracking jokes at meetings. He started looking over his shoulder. He tried to text me again. Just once. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a while before replying. "We already did. You just didn't listen." I never got a response. By the end of the week, his access to several internal systems was restricted. He no longer had visibility on project boards. Then came the HR meeting, the one where they asked him to step out midday, folder in hand, eyes scanning the room as if someone had stabbed him in the back. But the truth was, he did that all on his own. I watched him walk past my desk. He didn't make eye contact. But I felt his eyes on me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't regret. It was something darker, humiliation. The company let him resign voluntarily, probably to save face. But we all knew the truth. And honestly, that moment wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I'd won. What I felt was closure. Like a wound finally stitched shut. Word got around, as it always does. But most people didn't ask questions. Maybe they didn't need to. Maybe they knew what kind of man Tyler was all along. Or maybe they saw it as a warning, don't play games where people are working hard to build something real. As for Elena and me, we began to talk more, not just about Tyler, but about everything. What we wanted from life. What we feared. What we almost let slide in the name of romance. We laughed, sometimes even about him, like the time he texted her "Good night, sweetheart" and texted me "Miss your laugh" within the same minute. It was ridiculous. It was gross. And somehow, it was also healing. One afternoon, a month later, as we sat together at a coffee shop near the office, she said, "I can't believe I almost let someone like that shape how I see myself." I nodded. Never again. And we clinked our mugs together like warriors after battle. We hadn't just survived a manipulator. We had exposed him. In the weeks that followed Tyler's departure, the office felt lighter. Not dramatically so. There was no parade, no banners. But something had shifted. People smiled a little more in the hallway. Conversations didn't feel like they had to be coded or careful. The air didn't carry tension the way it used to. I noticed it most in myself. At first, I was afraid that people would talk. That I'd be known as one of the girls Tyler dated, like some whispered punchline. But it never happened. In fact, when word got out, and it always does, the reaction surprised me. It wasn't judgment. It was quiet support. A nod in the break room. A fresh coffee left on my desk. A manager gently pulling me aside to say, "That took guts. I'm proud of you." I realized something important. I hadn't lost my dignity by loving the wrong person. I'd reclaimed it by standing up for myself. Elena and I remained close. Our shared experience had bonded us in ways I never expected. It wasn't about friendship formed over spite, it was about healing through honesty. We had been manipulated by the same man, yes. But we chose not to turn against each other. We chose to connect. One afternoon, months later, we hosted a casual talk during the company's Workplace Wellness Week. The theme was boundaries, ethics, and recognizing manipulation in professional spaces. Neither of us named names. We didn't have to. But when I looked around the room and saw the way people leaned in, I knew our story had made a difference. Sometimes your lowest moment becomes the beginning of someone else's clarity. I stopped checking Tyler's social media long ago. I don't care if he's found someone new. I don't care if he thinks of me, or if he spins the story in a way that paints him as the misunderstood hero. That chapter is closed, sealed with lessons and strength I never knew I had. And as for me? I'm still working at the same company. Still chasing my dream of opening that bookstore cafe one day. Still learning, still growing, but now with clearer eyes, a stronger heart, and better instincts. I even started dating again. But this time, I don't confuse charm with character. I don't mistake attention for affection. I don't silence my instincts when something feels wrong. Because I've already lived the worst-case scenario. And I came out better for it. If you asked me back then, that night in the rain, standing outside the bar with takeout in hand and betrayal boiling in my chest, if I thought I'd come out stronger, I would have laughed through tears. But now? Now I know. Some heartbreaks don't break you. They build you.